Hello world, and welcome to another one of my how-to videos. Now tonight I'm going to try and show you how to solder correctly. I've been inundated, or should that be inundated, I can never get that right, with messages about soldering and how to do it correctly. Now before we start, let's look at it this way. When you leave school, generally most of us do head in a direction doing something that we like to do. That could be electronics, it could be electrician, it could be a carpenter, it could be a plumber, and of course there's thousands more different choices of where we would end up doing whatever we like doing best. Now there's no better way of learning to do anything than experience, and I'm sure you would have to agree with me on that. Experience is the answer, and of course I can't teach you experience, because I chose electronics as one of my favourite things to do when I left school, and I've done it for quite some time, and of course I have learnt to solder really well, and again it is experience, but I can share some of these experiences with you here and now. So hopefully you'll find this interesting and helpful. So now, first, the tools of the trade to do correct soldering and get it right. Okay, the first thing is the soldering iron, obviously. Do not go out and buy yourself a cheap soldering iron. They are a complete waste of time and waste of money. You get cheap soldering irons rated at 25 watts or 30 watts or whatever, and to be honest with you, they're all a waste of time. They're absolute crap. Buy yourself a decent branded soldering iron. Now I actually use Antex, which is this one. This is a 25 watt. It's got exchangeable tips. You can change it for different size tips, obviously. I'm not going to touch it because it's on, but you can put different size tips in it, which is very simple to do. Just slides off, slide another one on. A little trick of the trade as well is when you put a different tip or a new tip on the iron, use silicon paste, what's used in transistors, putting transistors on heat sinks, because the silicon paste not only conducts the heat better, which gives you more heat to the tip itself, it also makes it much easier to get it off when the tip is knackered and you need to change it, or you need to change it for a different size. So get yourself a decent soldering iron. You've got Antex, which this is, you've got Weller, they're very good. Get yourself a branded soldering iron. Now there's two very important points about getting soldering correct. One of them is keeping the iron tip clean. Now the camera here is on a tripod. My soldering iron is in a cradle like this, which I'll explain to you in a minute, but it's actually velcro to my workbench, so I can't really swing the camera around to it very well. But it's one of these. It's a soldering iron holder basically. It's got a coil spring there, which this one's not got it on, but the iron sort of sits in there, and it's here. It's got a trough which has got a special sponge in it, proper sponge, which I keep wet, lubricated, for cleaning the iron tip. It's very important you keep the tip of the iron clean. Now next up, we need to talk about solder itself. There are a few different types of solder, and it's very important that you use the correct stuff for what the job is you're going to do. Now if I've got my information correct here, lead-free solder is now compulsory in all manufacturing plants, factories where people are using solder, because lead-free is better for the health. It's one of these health and safety things here in the UK anyway. I don't know about the rest of the world, but it certainly is here in the UK. Lead-free solder has to be used in a working environment, but lead-free solder is crap. It's absolute rubbish. Now I get so many repairs coming through the workshop which have been flow soldered on machines or even by hand with lead-free solder. The problem with lead-free solder, it dries up really quick, and it's not long before you end up with dry joints, particularly when they're subjected to heat from electronic equipment. It dries up very quick, then you end up with a dry joint and a problem with the piece of equipment. So lead-free solder for me is absolute rubbish. I will not use it. Now there's no reason for you not to use it in your own home environment. There's no law against that. So I use proper lead and tin solder all the time, and of course it's fluxed as well. So I'll give you an example. This roll here, this is cell. In fact, I mean, it's just I'll read it to you really. It says it's 60-40, which is 60% tin, 40% lead alloy. I'm just going to read it to you. It's 2 times flux cord. Obviously flux is very important. And on the back here, I'll read it again, it's this bit to you. It says here, warning, all cell solder contains lead. Accepted working practices should be followed whilst using this product. In other words, the best thing to do is have an extractor fan on while you're working with it. Draw the fumes away from your mouth and from your working environment. I don't actually bother that much. I know I should, but I don't. But anyway, lead solder is the best to use. 60-40 with flux is the best to use. Now this roll here is actually 18 gauge, I believe. Let me have a look. Yeah, 1.2 millimeters, 18 gauge, 1.2 millimeters. This is good for most jobs. If I'm doing something very delicate and very small and very intricate, I'll use a different size, which is like this. It's thinner. Probably you'll see it on the camera. It's exactly the same. It's non-corrosive flux, 5 core, 60-40 tin lead. But it's actually thinner. It's only 0.7 millimeter, and this is handy for, like I say, smaller jobs being a little bit more refined. There's also solder like this. Now I don't have this on a roll. I've got quite a few offcuts of it, and this is pure silver solder. Now you can buy this on the internet, and it's got certain properties that are very good for certain things, which I'll tell you about a little later on. Because soldering is used in all walks of life, I've not actually put Triang, Hornby or any relevance to model railway, because yes, it is used in model railway, which is something I do, but it's also used in lots of other things, so I've not put that in the title. Basically, how to solder is the title, and hopefully by the time we get to the end of this video you will have experienced some information from me that has shown how to improve your soldering to the best that I can express it to you. I've now zoomed the camera in as close as I can, keeping it in focus, in the hope that I can show you and explain to you one of the most common forms of soldering that is required is putting 2 wires together. That is the most common thing that is really soldered. Right, so let's start at the beginning. We've got a piece of wire. I've just got some scrap wire out the scrap box, so what I'm going to do, I'm going to strip that end, and I'm going to strip that end. So we've now got 2 stripped ends. Now the obvious thing to do here, what people will do for joining 2 wires together, there's more than one way of doing it. I know that sounds strange, but there really is more than one way of doing it. Now the first thing that most people would do, they would twist this piece here like so, and they would then get the other wire they want to solder together, and they would twist that. Now that is okay, assuming it's stranded wire, of course. That is okay, and then the obvious thing to do then would be to put the 2 wires together and twist them like so, ready to solder. Now of course that's expected to be done like that, but it's not the best way of doing it, and I'll explain that why in a minute. But before we do, let me move on to the second point that I said. I told you that there's 2 main points about soldering. One is keeping the iron clean using the wetted sponge on the holder of the iron, and the other is, this is the most important point of soldering, flow. The items that are being soldered together have to both flow. If they're not flowing, you do not have a good solder joint. So I'll do that now here. I'm going to get my roll of ordinary solder, which I've got here. I can find the end. Oh no, it's disappeared. I've got it. Right, okay. Now, if I were going to solder these together, I would simply put some on the iron, and I would go under the wire, and I would literally just flow it like that, and that has flowed well. We've now got a perfect soldered joint, but there is a problem with it. it's actually thicker than it needs to be, and I'll explain why. First of all, let me cut this off. I'm going to do this again, and I'll explain to you why there's a better way of doing it. Right, I'm going to strip them again, like 1, like 2, but this time I'm not going to twist them on their own first. The reason being, if you think about this, if you twist them up together, twist them up individually first and then twist them together, it's actually a thicker joint. But by leaving them stranded and not individually twisted, put them together, now twist them like so, and we now have a much thinner joint, because when they're twisted together individually they make the joint bigger. So once again, I will just literally get the iron underneath and flow solder it all the way along like so. We've now got another joint that is much smaller in size. It's much smaller in size, and of course that is the perfect joint. But there are many other ways of joining wires, and I'll have a little break here and I'll show you some more. This time I've already cut the old piece off that I just soldered, and I've stripped them off again, and this time I've individually twisted them. And there's a reason why I've done it this time, is because there's another way you can join wires, particularly if you want to go in a long, I'll get the words right in a minute. If you want to go in a horizontal way, that's right, instead of being joined back to back. So what you can do is strip them off to an X amount, like that, put them about halfway with each other, and then get them and twist them against each other like so, like that. Now that just needs a flow solder. By the way, I am cleaning the tip of the iron on every time I'm doing this. I know that you waste some solder, but trust me, that doesn't matter, because once the solder's been on the iron, the flux has evaporated, and you need fresh flux every time to do a joint. So wipe your iron constantly, wipe the bit of the iron constantly. So again, I'm going to flow solder it. And once again, there's no better solder joint than one that's properly flowed. As you'll see there, that now is properly flowed, and of course it's in line in a horizontal fashion, and you can put some shrink sleeving over that and give yourself a good joint. I'm now going to show you my ultimate soldering party trick. Now, when I get any friends round or customers who we end up talking about soldering, I show them this little trick, because if you can do this right, you can solder, and this is really interesting. I'm going to wipe the iron, so I've got a clean iron again. I'm going to put some fresh solder on it. Now I've already cut the joint off again, and I've already stripped them both back, and I've already twisted them individually here. Again, there's a reason for that, because what I'm going to do, I'm going to flow solder that one like so, and I'm going to do the same with this one like so. So we've got two pieces ready flowed, ready tinned to put together. Now this is where it gets really interesting. Watch this. Now, if you can do this and get the results that I can, then you are going to be good at soldering. What I'm going to do here, I'm going to cut that right back to that small little piece there, look. And I'm going to do the same with the other one, like so. Now, we've got two very small pieces there, which are going to go, believe it or not, end to end. And this is definitely a test of good soldering, because if you can join two wires like this, you know how to solder. So watch this. What I'm going to do, I'm going to get what I call my little man. He's helping hands, grips everything for you. So move it into the frame for you. Now I'm going to put one piece of wire in this clip here, like so. I'm going to put the other piece in the other clip, of course, obviously, like so. I'm going to line them up, get this guys, end to end. Now, this has to be, because they're not twisted, this has to be a worst case scenario of soldering, because they're not twisted together, they're just touching end to end. Clean the iron again, put some fresh solder on the iron. Right guys, watch this. Float soldering end to end. Carefully put the iron underneath, add the solder, and have a flowed joint like that. Now if you can solder together like that, and I'm telling you now, and I know this for a fact, if I take this out of the helping hands like that, I know that I can't, no matter how much I try, I can't snap it. I can't snap it, guys. I can't snap it. That is how to solder, guys. This wire will break before that solder joint gives in. And so, if you're actually joining wires like this end to end, you end up with a much less bulky, well, finished product, really. And it's just very simple. Slide some shrink sleeving over it, use a cigarette lighter or heat gun or whatever, and you have a lovely, neat joint that you cannot, under any circumstances, break. That's how to do it, guys. Now there is one other way you can put wires together. There's no rule here that says you can't do it whichever one of the ways I'm showing you. And the way I'm going to do it now is actually quite bulky, and personally I don't particularly like doing it. But one thing I'm going to try and do, which I don't know if I can handle this, is because I'm used to doing it correctly, I'm going to try and solder badly. I don't really know if I'm going to be able to do it, but we'll wipe the iron. I'm going to put some solder on the iron, like so. And now, the worst case scenario would be to put these like next to each other and sort of like go over it like that with the iron. Even that didn't take, like that. And you've got a solder joint that's an absolute waste of time. Look, it's just going to come apart. And we're back to the same thing. It has to be flowed. Flowing is the most important factor. So once again, with a clean iron, some fresh solder, you need to tin what you're going to put together. They need to be tinned thoroughly, like that. Okay, and the other one like this. Now I'm using slightly thicker wire here as well as a demonstration. So now they're both flowed, I'm going to wipe the iron again. I'm going to put some fresh solder on, which has got fresh flux in it as well. Put the two together, then warm them together like so. Oops, I moved it before it had gone off. Hang on, I'll do that again for you. This is not my favourite way of doing it because, like I say, the joint is bulky and it's not very tidy. You know, it's okay, you can do it that way. But again, the important point is both items, whatever it is you're soldering, they have to be well tinned and they have to flow together. If they don't flow together, you won't get a good joint. Look. I can't break that one either. I'm going to pour myself a whiskey. Because soldering is used in all sort of kinds of things and not just typically model railway, I'm going to try and show you some other things that could possibly be required to be soldered. The list is endless. I mean, solder will solder steel, it'll solder copper, brass, tin, lead, but of course certain metals like aluminium you can't just solder to directly with normal solder. You've got to use a proper solder, a special aluminium solder. But most people would want to solder normal things, and the ones I've just aforementioned will solder quite well. Now, what I'm going to do here, because it can be used, it can be required, sorry, to be used in all sorts of walks of life. I've got a piece of wire here which I've already pared back and twisted, and what I'm going to do, I'm going to solder it onto a tag. Onto an old tag, which is something that people would probably want to do. Now this tag's been soldered to before, it's an old one, and so I wouldn't rely on the old solder. I never rely on what's already on the item to be soldered. So what I'm going to do with this gadget here, which is called a solder sucker, speaks for itself. You can also get a thing called a desoldering wick, which I'll show you a little bit later before the end of the video. I've not got it close by, but this is very handy for sucking off solder off items before you put fresh solder on, like so. So I'm going to heat that up like so and suck it off, and not quite enough on the first go, but the second go has got it. Right, now, so what I'm going to do now, I'm going to put some fresh solder onto the tag. There we go. That's nice and flowed really well. I'm going to put fresh solder obviously and flow the piece of wire like so. But now, this is something that many people who solder don't realise. What they do, they put the wire on the appropriate place to be soldered. In this case it's a tag, and they solder it. Fine, that's fine, it works fine. But you've got this stupid long piece of wire, and this, I can't believe how many people I've seen do soldering like this, because it's stupid. What you need to do before you solder to what you're going to solder to is chop off what you don't want, and you only need a fraction of what you started with to solder, because it's neat and it's tidy and it doesn't look horrible, and it's doing the job fine. It's absolutely fine. You don't need a long length of wire exposed. You need the sleeving of the wire virtually, well, it is actually on where you're soldering to, and that is absolutely fine. As you saw in the video not too long ago, I actually put two pieces of wire end to end like that, soldered them, and I could not separate them. And like I said to you at that time, soldering like that is, if you can solder like that and not separate them, you know how to solder. Now, that being the case, there's actually no need to wrap wires around things. If you can solder that good, you don't have to wrap. But some people like to wrap. So again, as another example, I've got a piece of wire which I've already stripped off for you. I twisted it individually, obviously, on its own. I'm going to put it through a hole of a new tag. I'm going to bend it round and wrap it. Like I say, it's not the sort of thing I personally like to do, but some people prefer wrapping, so I'm just going to do that like so, and then I'm going to fill it with solder until it all flows as one piece. That is yet again another fantastic solder joint that is not going anywhere. It's wrapped and soldered. It's never going to leave that, and it's soldered and it's flowed properly. That is what it's all about, flowing properly together. Moving on to other things that might need to be soldered to, which in this case is a potentiometer, or a volume control tube, if you don't know what a potentiometer is. Volume control, base control, a control. Now, this is obviously like a tin backing to it, and sometimes it's required to be soldered to. So I'm going to clip it in the helping hands, like so, and I'm going to try and solder to the back. But I'm not going to do anything to it other than try and solder to it. Now watch. It's not taking. Running off, it's not taking. But if you're going to solder something like this, if you get a file and scratch it up, like so, and then try again, it's flowed and it's taken perfectly, look. Perfect. And you can solder to that, you can solder a wire to that and it will never come off. You have to clean the items, and in the case of certain things like this, you have to file them to get to the metal underneath the outside coating before you can solder to it. Okay, now as I said earlier, this video is not just about model railway, it's about soldering in general, because it covers a wide variety of items, a wide variety of needs. Now, but what I have done here is I've got a piece of old steel model railway track, which is the Series 3 track, old piece of steel stuff, and you can see it's actually quite badly rusty. You can actually see it quite easily on the camera there. Now, if we want to solder to this, there's a few ways you can go about it. The first thing is, if we take the iron and clean it on the sponge again, and we get some solder on the iron, like so, and then we try and solder to the side of the rail, it's not going to happen, look. It's just not going to happen. Going to run off every time. Because the rail is crap, it's dirty, and it's just not going to take to it. Now, there's a few ways you can get around this. One of them is, take a file, and you file where you want to solder, excuse me, and you get the crap off first, like so, and then you try and solder it. We're starting to get there, but it's still not quite enough. It's sort of alright, but it's not quite there. But the other option is to get flux, tinned flux. You get a bit of flux and you put it on the area to be soldered, which we know is there. So, trying to get it off the screwdriver. Come on, there we go, bit of flux on it. And then we clean the iron again on the sponge and we try it again with a bit of flux. Now the flux should penetrate, which it has. That penetrates the crap on the track and gives us the facility to a good soldered joint, which I could now, if I pull back the piece of wire, like so, right, I'm just going to tin a piece of wire here, show you. Right, I've tinned a piece of wire. I'm going to cut off the surplus because I don't need it half an inch long. I need it 1/8 of an inch long. Like there, it's fine. More fresh solder. Remember, fresh solder every time, and I know that that will solder now to that track, like so. And it's perfect, and that will not pull off that track. But there's one more trick you can do here. Instead of messing around with flux and solder and filing, if you take, I'll move it along, another piece of track, right, and we're looking at this bit, shall we say here, right, okay, this is where silver solder comes into its own. Now, I don't know why, I can't give you the reason why, but there's something in silver solder that attacks dirty and rusty, I don't know, metal, whatever. You don't have to mess around with the flux, the ordinary solder. This will do it right away. It's something to do with the properties of the silver solder. I'm going to go on a really uncleaned, perfect bit of track here that's never been touched with flux or a file or anything. Now watch this. This has the ability to clean it, and wow, it's soldered to it. I mean, it actually has soldered to it. And then what you can do is get your piece of wire, and what I normally do when I've used silver solder, which dries looking a little bit dry, I then use ordinary solder with it to brighten it up, and then I can attach my wire like so, and that is not going anywhere, and that's without even cleaning it up. So that's how you do it, with a bit of silver solder. It doesn't need any cleaning up required. Of course, you've got to remember that you are soldering to a bit of metal that's on a bit of plastic, so you don't want to be keeping it iron there for a massive length of time. But I've never yet damaged a piece of track doing this, so yeah, fine. Now if you've got nickel track, you don't need to worry about silver solder, because all the ordinary solder will go straight onto nickel track, dead easy. So I think that's about it, guys. You know, you can solder to model railway track, you can solder to tin or plates or copper or brass, you can solder wires together, and I've shown you how to do it properly. But the three main things you need to be sure of, and the three main things you need to learn are this: use lead alloy solder, not lead free. Make sure your iron is constantly kept clean. The tip, is constantly kept clean with the sponge with water on it. And most important, whatever you're going to solder together, make sure the solder on both items is tinned and flowed first, then put them together and add more solder so the whole lot flows together. If you do that, you'll never have a problem in soldering. I hope that's helped you. See you guys. Bye.